Good morning, everybody. My name is Ugo Tramballi, Senior Advisor and Head of India Program with ISPI. And together with Claire Casey from the Economies Intelligence Unit from London, we will have the honor to have a dialogue with the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Subramanian Jaishankar. And I would like to welcome the minister because it's the first time that I've met, we are at the fifth edition, the first time that I've met an Indian minister, his guest, and we hope will be just the first of many other times.
Sure.
And as usual, I would like to start with you.
Minister Shankar, it's an honor to be with you here this morning. I wanted to start with taking a broader view. Mm-hmm. We've seen a much more active Indian foreign policy since Prime Minister Modi's first election in 2014. I'm hoping you can lay out for all of us here today how we should see India's growing role in global affairs and in an increasing multipolar world, and also how that specifically is shaping your engagement with the broader Mediterranean region.
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, let me say it's very good to be here, and I definitely hope to come back if you treat me well today.
We'll see.
Yes. Look, I think there are two parts to that issue. One are the changes that are taking place in India. And the changes that are taking place with India, you can quantify them, you can describe them, but the short point is probably in about a decade, give or take, India would be the third largest economy in the world. In about 5 years, India would be the most populous country in the world. India definitely is externalizing at a faster rate. What is happening in India is having an impact in the rest of the world. I mean, even if you look at the Mediterranean itself, we have with Mediterranean countries today about $55 billion of trade. We have 530,000 Indians who live around the Mediterranean, about half of them in Italy. We have about 450 Indian companies operating in the Mediterranean zone. I say that to underline that in terms of India's capabilities, in terms of India's engagement with the world, that's growing. And that's a trend which will keep going. The second is what's happening in the world. And what's happening in the world is that the world is, you used the word multipolar. It's not only moving towards more multipolarity, it's also moving towards less multilateralism. So you have more players and weaker rules. You are entering a period where the 1945 order is no longer going to work the way it used to. What will replace it is very unclear at this point of time. But what it does when you have more capability and in a sense, more confusion or opportunity, whatever you call it. You will obviously try and be more active. You would try to influence world affairs. You would like to shape outcomes. And to a large extent, you see that happening. So you see that happening in terms of India, taking on more responsibilities in its own region. So if you see today disaster relief operations, humanitarian assistance, the earthquake in Nepal, the civil war in Yemen, the cyclone in Mozambique, you see India out there as a first responder. But you also see, for example, the Paris COP, where on climate change, India played a very critical role in bridging the trust deficit between the developed countries and the developing countries. You see it in the G20, where you have issues like today counterterrorism, anti-corruption, the digital rules. When we in the past thought of a fair world, we think of fairness in terms of wealth and the material flows. But today, digital fairness, like climate justice, Digital fairness is also today a very big objective. And you see a country like India weighing in on that. So absolutely, I mean, we've been more active in the last 5 years, and trust me, we'll be more active in the next 5.
And specific to the Mediterranean region, do you think it's shaping India's engagement?
Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting today if you look how much we have, I mean, I would say almost unconsciously spread out. You know, at the UN General Assembly this year, we did two meetings with groups of countries, which was a departure from the norm, which was we did a meeting with the Pacific Island states. Now, we have done that in the Pacific Islands, we've done that in India, but we've now sort of regularized that. We did it with the Caribbean states. So actually today there is a Indian presence and Indian interest. Now, a lot of that was always there. I mean, if you were to look at the diaspora, for example, I mean, there are roughly today, I mean, depending on how you count, something like between 32 to 34 million Indians, people of Indian origin living abroad. But they were there, but they have now become more relevant. There's a greater awareness. They have greater awareness of India as well. So some of it is diaspora politics, some of it is international trade, investment. A lot of it is, you know, our development assistance programs, for example, are much, much bigger. I mean, the Mediterranean includes North Africa. We have today one of the larger we have a $10 billion development assistance program to Africa. And we have, out of 54 countries, projects in 41. So what is happening is, you know, in a sense, I would say the world is pulling us. We are also pushing. Some of it is happening, you know, in the natural unfolding of a big economy. And you saw that happen with China a decade before. I mean, China is very different. The models are different. The way of working is different. I grant you all that. But the fact is, when a big country kind of goes up in the international order, you will see its implications, the ripple impact across the world.
Minister Jaishankar, let's focus a little bit, let's remain a little bit on the MENA region. You are an outstanding diplomat. You've been ambassador in Beijing, ambassador in Washington, D.C. India has many friends, a few foes, and no allies. From Jawaharlal Nehru to Narendra Modi, from Congress to BJP, you don't have allies. You prefer to act alone. Are you going to do the same in the MENA region, in the Mediterranean?
So let me get that again. Many friends, few.
Just a few. Anybody?
Many friends, few foes, no allies.
No alliance.
Okay. Look, that situation or that mindset was started, frankly, as a survival technique. Okay, it was a survival technique in the Cold War, when people didn't want, it was friend or foe, and therefore you had to be an ally of somebody, and we didn't want to be. Okay, because having just regained our independence, you didn't want to sort of dilute your sovereignty by joining an alliance system. But my sense is what was a compulsion 60, 50 years ago, today is actually, frankly, a lifestyle. That if you have a multipolar world, where there are multiple sides, then actually, to my mind, the country that is best placed is the country, if you do a sort of a credit debit view of the world, where your likability is higher and your dislikability is the least. And I think that's the kind of diplomatic sweet spot that countries should be aiming for. The fact that we have a tradition of being able to engage multiple sides at the same time, I think is today going to serve us well. It's a very interesting case where you develop the skill and the requirement comes later on in life, but you already have that skill. So we will, I hope, do well in this world.
But, sorry, let's just follow up. But Chinese are acting in a different way. I mean, with the Silk Road in the Mediterranean, they buy ports, they buy companies, they look. There is some sort also of a geopolitical side of the Chinese one. They look allied, not only just to try to make a business. Are you going to act on a different way than the Chinese, with the large network of Silk Road?
Well, look, let's look at what is common between India and China and what is not, what differentiates India and China. I mean, it's common that you have two large Asian civilizational states who 200 years ago were very important in the global economy, who had a very difficult 150 years, who now once again taking a more important place in the global order. And who have their own history and tradition and culture and so on. So that's the common bit. But the fact is, anybody who's been to India and China will tell you these are two very different societies. They're organized on very different principles. The mindsets are very different. The beliefs are very different. Now, what happens when big countries kind of start projecting themselves in the global order? Broadly, what they do at home is what they'll do abroad. So if you were to ask me saying, why is China doing all these things? I mean, to me, it's very natural. I mean, that's what China was doing at home. That's the way they would extrapolate it outside into the world. And, it's for the Chinese to speak for themselves. But the fact is, in a competitive world, everybody will do what's in their interest and, do it their way. Now, our way is very different. I mean, we are a market economy. We are a pluralistic society. We are a political democracy. For us, we are consultative at home. So we would naturally be consultative abroad. So if we were to do things, we would prefer to do it in a more consultative fashion. So today we also do projects abroad. We do projects in Africa, we do projects in Asia, we do projects in the South Pacific, we do it in the Caribbean. But our way of doing projects is that, we would prefer that they respond to local priorities, to local demands. We would like to involve, local talent. We would encourage local ownership. Ideally, we would like to build and transfer. And the idea, is, and frankly, in a way, I would describe India as a southern power, that for us, the South matters. It's for us, in a way, our political constituency. We are countries who regained independence, and there's a natural bonding among us. We feel we have a moral obligation to many of these countries, and they have a lot of trust in us. And as I said, in places like Paris, you could see that, which was, if India said this was a good option, a lot of countries said, okay, I mean, we will go with India's judgment on that issue. So the Chinese will do what the Chinese will do. But my way of working, my way of advancing my interest will be the Indian way, which would be very different.
I'd like to build on something you said earlier about India's ability to bridge the confidence gap among nations and the agility that it's been afforded to you by not locking yourself into formal alliances. Almost no country is more exposed to potential oil market issues in the Gulf, given the import reliance on producers there in India and your significant refining industrial complex. I'm curious what the view of Delhi is of tensions in the Gulf and whether there's a role for India in helping to perhaps bridge the confidence gap there.
Well, it's interesting that you should define the Gulf primarily through the lens of energy. Okay, it's natural, and we are probably the second, I think, biggest energy consumer out of the Gulf. But I want to lay out for you a much more complex reality. Today, roughly about a third of India's trade partners I mean, if I were to take the top 20 trade partners of India, I think 6 or 7 of them are in the Gulf. Okay, our trade with the Gulf is more than our trade with Europe. We have 9 million, about 9 million Indians working in the Gulf. So we have more Indians in the Gulf than the population of Austria. About 2/3 of our remittances come from the Gulf. About 2/3 of our oil comes from the Gulf. So, so for us, the Gulf is something which is much bigger. The stakes are much broader. But for all the numbers that I give you, also bear in mind that the Gulf has also had a very strong cultural influence on India. That what happens in the Gulf has, some downstream implications for what happens in a complex society like ours. So what we see again in the Gulf is, look, as the overarching discipline, as the dominance of the United States lessens, today regional politics acquires a greater life of its own. What you've seen in the Gulf in the last few years would not have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Okay, a lot of countries would have kind of, in a sense, looked to external powers to arbitrate or mitigate their differences, and that has come down. So the local play, in a way, is much more in the Gulf. So now we have very good relations with all the Gulf countries because, all of them in some way, whether it is energy, whether it is people, whether it is culture, history, all of them are countries who are very close with us. But we frankly, for us, it's second nature to navigate this very complex sort of landscape. And in terms of, what we should do, obviously, we'd like to see stability in the Gulf. We would like to see more congenial intra-Gulf atmosphere. But we are also real. We have today a naval deployment in the Gulf, in the Straits of Hormuz, because our interests are involved out there. So there's one part of what we'd like to see, there's one part of what we need to do. We'll do both.
Italy is the only G7 country who's decided to be formally part of Silk Road. Are you upset? What is your comment on it?
No, look, I think that's Italy's choice. Why would I have a view on what is Italy's choice? Italy will do what is best for Italy.
And what is the best for India in the Mediterranean?
Well, look, for us, what is best for India, as I said, we already have substantial interests in the Mediterranean. I see that growing. I see that growing because, as I said, I see the Indian economy growing. And I see, a very sort of, shall I say, a part of economic development which is normally not discussed. We all know that the world will be more digitized, okay? We use this phrase, knowledge economy, okay? What does knowledge economy mean? Knowledge economy actually means, in a sense, digitizing, digitizing and making intelligent sort of activities and objects. What it will do is it will put a premium on talent. You will need, the world will need a larger talent pool to deal with a more digital economy, to deal with a greater knowledge economy. And I see great opportunities for India out there. If you ask me, what would I look in foreign policy to give me a stronger hand in the next 20 years? I would hope I can bring the talent of India into play in the global economy in a more effective way. And you can see that even in the old industry. Today, whether it's the auto industry or the steel industry or, almost any industry today is more digitized, it is more knowledge-driven, and that really opens up new possibilities.
Claire.
We've seen a lot of protests around the world in the last year, specifically in the Middle East and North African region, but also broadly across Europe. And what I would think you could say, unifies them all as a sort of demand for accountability from government. As a representative of the largest democracy in the world, what's your view? What's the view from Delhi on this broader global trend?
Well, look, as a democracy, obviously, it's a belief that government should be accountable. So, in principle, you would say, well, that's fine. Obviously, people who have principles ideally should practice it most of all at home, which is what we do. So we are very proud of the fact that Indian democracy is flourishing. In terms of what happens abroad, there is I would say, a Indian or a Asian or a post-colonial view of how international relations should be conducted, which by and large puts, you conduct interstate relations. Whatever your views about what's happening in the world, you are very cautious about commenting on the internal affairs of people. That is very much, it's certainly been an Indian tradition, but I would say it's been a broader Asian tradition as well. I'm aware that that's not exactly been the tradition in either Europe or North America. The problem is, when you start being judgmental, there's also a danger that you'll be selective. That demonstrations somewhere will, you would say, oh, it's great, people are protesting. But if they protest somewhere where you have stakes, then maybe you don't like that protest so much. So you will start to develop multiple standards for what's happening in the world. So the problem of applying judgments to a very complex global landscape is you'll end up looking like you have double standards. And I'll give you an example. About 15 years ago, around the time of 9/11, we had a dictatorship to the east of India, and we had a dictatorship to the west of India. The dictatorship to the east of India was in Myanmar, which was under sanctions from Europe and America. The dictatorship to the west of India was Pakistan under General Musharraf, which was hailed as an ally of the West. So that's what happens when you start taking positions.
Yes, thank you very much. We would like to have more time to more questions, but the time is over because the format of MED, despite the positive agenda, is like an artificial intelligence. It's efficient, but it doesn't have a soul and a brain. So thank you very much, Minister, and we hope to see you next year.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we start next session right away.